Welcome to another pint with Seaniebee. We're coming to you from Chiswick in London. Carrie Reichardt is a ceramic artist and has just been appointed the first ever visual artist in residence for the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. She's a very strong and funny lady. And I'm welcoming Carrie Reichardt to a pint with Seaniebee. We're about to have some wine, but it's chilling in the freezer, so you might hear that later. How are you?
Yes, we're actually going to have some Prosecco, aren't we? It's a Prosecco.
Some fizzy. It's a rainy, horrible day in London, even though it's supposed to be spring, but spring hasn't sprung yet. Now, the thing I want to talk about is, first of all, and at the end of the podcast, you will see a link to Carrie's house, and her house is probably one of the most original houses I've certainly ever seen in the whole world, not to mind in London. It is completely covered over 3 stories, front and back, with ceramic art. So you're a ceramic artist. Explain to my listeners what ceramic art is and explain how this amazing house came about.
Well, I'm not sure if I can explain exactly what ceramic art is, and also I'm a multimedia artist, really.
Right, okay.
I mean, I do a lot of work in ceramics and mosaics, but I also work in photography, performance, sculpture, mixed media. But I suppose I'm really well known for my house, which is mosaiced. So about 21 years ago, I was working as a community artist doing mosaics. My background's actually in sculpture. I have a first-class degree in sculpture, but I couldn't really do what I was doing then because I was working with casting and resin and cancerous materials, and I'd had a child, and so I guess I was looking for a different medium to work in, and I just decided to make a mosaic in the garden. And then as soon as I did it, it was literally like a light goes on. Yeah, I was just like, oh my God.
So explain what mosaics and ceramics are for people who don't know. They're glass and pottery and ceramics. And
most people know what mosaics is. It's broken pieces of either glass or ceramic put together, going right back to Roman time. That's not really what my mosaics are like. Because I come from a fine art background, I tend to see my work really now as a collage. I use tiles, I print onto them, cut them up, and put them back together again and make murals using tiles.
Right.
But the house is over a 21-year period, so some of it is just made with little small shards of glass, and some of it is tiled, some of it is where I've actually made objects in ceramics and embedded them. So really, you're looking at me learning my craft over 21 years.
So the house is in a leafy suburb of Chiswick on a road with lots of other houses next to it. It's an old, I guess, pre-war building. You did one in your back garden, and then what made you say, I know what I'm going to do, I'm going to cover the whole house with this?
Well, a couple of things kind of came together. Like I said, I was doing community art, and whenever you do public art, community art, my experience is there's always some steering committee that's like, you get paid more than you to oversee what you do. Yes. And I got kind of fed up with being told what I couldn't do. You know, I was working on a huge public library in Harold Hill, and we had a symbol to say stop burning the trees, and we were told we couldn't use it because it might incite arson. I don't know that many kids that look at a mosaic and go, you know what, let's set fire to something.
Forest,
And it was all about recycling, and so we'd worked with some kids and they'd come up with this logo that said, don't murder the planet bleeds too. And it had the world with a tear coming out of blood. They said, you can't use that, that's depressing. And they made us change it to the environment is everywhere, which is meaningless. They want these platitudes. The trouble is with a lot of public art, somebody's worried about their job, someone's worried about offending. And I mean, this is 21 years ago. So
worse now.
A lot worse. And so at that time, I was getting fed up with those kind of censorship of what I was doing. And it was around Christmas time, and I bought myself a book called Fantasy Art, Fantasy Worlds, places around the world where people had mosaiced their houses or created these huge environments. And I was looking at it, and it was really funny because my dad had said to me, why don't you put some mosaics outside and, say like mosaicist within to advertise what you do? And I suddenly thought, why don't I just mosaic the house?
And you certainly did.
I'm just going to mosaic my house. And at the time, I used to joke it would probably take me 20 years, and it did. You have
a funny story about the totem pole, which was one of the first builds, which is at the front. There's a 3-story high. Is it a totem pole? Whatever.
Well, it's a Tiki totem pole.
It's a Tiki totem pole, but there was a little old lady story.
Well, the thing is, the front of the house on the lower half, one is like an Alice in Wonderland quintessential British scene with fly agaric mushrooms and naughty mandrakes and things. And the other side, I was into Tiki art and all that Polynesian art. And so there's this giant Tiki totem on the top. And Mary, who lives over the road, who was like my other mother, she has to be said. She was lovely. She just moved away, unfortunately. But she came over and she went, "Oh, Carrie, what have you done? You've put a 12-inch penis on the front of your house." I'm like, "Oh, Mary, that's your dirty mind. That's a Tiki totem pole." She's like, "Oh, Carrie, it's got a scrotum and everything." And it's like, it does. It says, "Oh, come all you faithful" at the top of it.
Yeah.
It's funny because years later I was in therapy and my therapist talked about my house and I said, "Would you like to see it?" And she said, "Well, yeah, I would like to see your house." So I showed her a picture and she went, "Why do you have this great big phallic object on your house?" And I was like, "Oh, you know what? I don't
Last
actually...
thing you need to tell us,
I'm not actually quite sure, but looking back, it's partly because all of that was partly designed by my partner at that time. I very consciously decided that we'd have loads of vaginas on the next section up, which are all hidden.
Now, Mary accepting, at any point did some finger wagger from the council come tutting to your door?
No, I mean, when I started doing it, I was absolutely obsessed that I would have this day in court. And I used to collect articles and followed various cases. Like, I don't know if you know about that guy who has a shark that goes into his roof.
Yeah.
You know, and I'd followed that case and he'd won from the human rights. He went all the way to Europe and won that right. And there was a woman in Twickenham who'd painted her house bright pink. And so I'd followed these cases and I knew the law. I know that the law states that I was allowed to put stone cladding, pebble dashing or tiling on the front of my house. The law doesn't say you can't mosaic your house in loads of bright colours because nobody does it. What the law says is people can complain. If enough of them complain, the council can do something. But the reality is I think someone local tried to set up a petition and there wasn't enough names on there. There wasn't enough of an outrage. I truly believe it's partly because it was by increments. It was very slow. It's tiled. It's mosaiced. If it was painted...
Beautiful, actually.
Well, if it was painted, I think people would say, you know, that's terrible, paint it over. But when you're talking about mosaics, you talk about having to physically remove it. It's so funny because each time I put it up, I go, "Oh, I can't believe I've got away with this naughty mandrake. I've got away with this." And on the back, I started putting "all power to the people" and "the revolution is now," and it was about death row. And I always kind of thought, if they come after me now, they'll have to say, "Well, I don't like that, what you've said." It would have to be about what I've actually, the actual artistic thing is, and not the fact that I've mosaiced my house. And it's like...
What if it started now? If somebody like you was at year zero now, that was going to take 20 years, do you think... Just the sort of nannying that goes on.
Well, I know someone up in Birmingham, my friend Caroline, who's started to mose her. Hers isn't really full of revolutionary text and weird things, but I personally think that most people like it. We like art.
Yeah. It's also like, to me, I mean, there's a lovely house I have an eye on in Dublin, which I have absolutely not got the funds to buy, but it's a very iconic house on the banks of the canal, and I walk by it every day. And I was saying to my girlfriend while we were walking by, you know, it would be great if we could buy that and just pay Carrie like $100,000 to come over and do it, like with all the Irish writers that use the canal as motivation and inspiration, Patrick Kavanagh and all these guys. And it would be a kind of an iconic gift to Ireland. Do you know that wouldn't? Because I can't imagine someone buying this house after you're gone and going,
this is the problem
take
I have
it down.
now. This is the problem. Who's going to buy it? It's got my mother's name on the front and it's all about death row on the back. I mean,
but you will find somebody who will get what it is all about and will pay him. You know, and anyone who says, "Okay, we've stripped down all of that," they must have ice in their hearts to do it because of the amount
unfortunately
of time.
Mosaics often do get removed. So many of the most amazing ones, the ones that were at a station have been removed. They're amazing ones that have been removed from all kinds of cities. They don't... Mosaics is universally loved.
Yeah.
You know, you only have to look at Barcelona. You only have to look at the places in the world where mad people like me have spent their life mosaicing things to know that these become the number one tourist attractions. It's a universally popular art form, but I don't think it doesn't have the reverence it should have in this country for sure, because it all falls into that decorative arts world.
But Gaudi would be an inspiration or not?
No, Gaudi is. If you look at what he was doing, he was so advanced. He was into recycling, he was into ergonomics, he was very advanced. And apparently he died stepping back to look at his piece.
Yeah, got run over or something.
Yes, and they didn't know who he was. They thought he was a poor person, so he was left to die. And yet when the people found out, there were huge, massive demonstrations. And
it's always the way. You make your money when you're dead in art. Now, you also, let's get into this bit. You also are very open, outspoken. You believe in removing the stigma attached to mental illness. I mean, when I first saw you present in Cork that time, you had a piece of art which was extremely disturbing and shocking, and it was the cutting art. Tell me a little bit about your views on that, your childhood, how you developed, because I know that you feel a lot of the way you were brought up has led to you being in this position right now, and you're not afraid to talk about it.
Well, when I look back now, I realise that I used art as a form of therapy. You know, my way of dealing with emotions, to deal with the world, to deal with injustice is through an artistic, creative response. And in times in my life when I haven't been involved in a creative process, I've been extremely unwell. You know, I have suffered from mental illness and problems a large part of my life. Most of my life has been happy accidents. You know, I've just ended up on something and done it.
What was your background? Where were you born and brought up?
I was born in Chiswick. I moved into this house when I was 16. My dad had it. You know, this is my parents' first house.
Right.
And my dad was a landlord, so he has all these houses that are very Rigsby-ish. I've lived in every room in this house as a bedsit. Moved here when I was 16 and did a course called FIDAS, which was Films, English, Drama and Art Studies, which was very bohemian, fantastic. I went from being bored to death at secondary school to suddenly being in an environment of like 12 kids. So we were taken to the Theatre of Cruelty to study Arto. We were taken to see quite shocking plays and introduced to all these different concepts and things. So,
and when you were little, were you artistic? Was it a happy life?
I am not. The joke in my family, like my brother laughs about the fact that I had a first class degree because I couldn't draw and I couldn't paint. I was a kid that made things. I was that kid that followed Blue Peter and sat there for hours and make what was on there.
Cornflakes boxes and all that.
Yeah, when I look back, I can tell that I really was someone that did tapestries. I did sewing. I'm always busy. But I realise now that I didn't have confidence. I wanted to draw and I wanted to paint, but I couldn't produce the work that was realistic in my own mind. And so I would use photocopies. I would find ways to create things without actually having to draw them. I think a large part of my life is I can tell how insecure I was about things, but how desperately I needed to actually produce things and make things and create things for my own sanity.
Do you look back on your early childhood as a happy time or a sad time? Or
according to my mother, I was very happy as a child, and I'm sure I was. And I look at my youngest and I see, because she's on the autistic spectrum, and I can see that maybe I was similar on that spectrum, and left to my own devices, left making things, I was a happy child. I think most things went wrong for me in puberty. Most things went wrong for me in trying to fit into secondary school. Most things, it's hard to pinpoint where these things happened. I have a very strange father, and we all kind of left home when we were young to kind of get away from him to a degree. But it's hard to know what started first. Did I take drugs because I was unhappy, or was I unhappy because I took drugs? Now, when I look back, and I've been in therapy for a long time, I found social situations difficult. And so, like so many people I know, my way to deal with that was to very quickly go to drinking and go to drugs.
Did you feel different from everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, a lot of people who I interview on this say that.
I'm the youngest of four, and I've always felt like the black sheep of my family.
I'm the same.
My nickname when I was growing up was Hey But the Parrot, because whenever anyone was talking in my family, I'd be going, hey, but, to try and they'd call me Hey But the Parrot.
You're trying to get a word in.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is more insecurity than feeling different. As a child, you get defences, and those defences, my defences, is probably that kind of anarchic, I don't care, don't want to be there anyway.
So what age were you when you started dabbling or getting into drugs, or what memories of that like?
Oh, God, I think as soon as I went to my first parties when I was 15, you know, it would just be drinking a bottle of martini as quick as you can.
So when you finished your schooling, you went to college.
Well, my first degree was actually film. I only lasted a term. I dropped out of that and became a tax collector for a year.
The irony.
Yeah, I know.
You have to learn about what you don't.
And then I saved up money and I went travelling. I went to India, I went to Nepal, I travelled around America for 6 months.
What age were you at this stage?
That was when I was 18, 19, and then I came back and decided to go back to college, and I went and did an art foundation. And at that point I wanted to do theatre design, but just before I went to do my foundation, I was sexually assaulted on the way home late at night I had a nervous breakdown. I was attacked in the summer. I started an art foundation, and it was really funny because at the end of this course, when they look at your portfolio, I'd managed to turn every single art exercise into a way of dealing with being attacked.
Yeah.
I can always remember we had to design a poster for children's playground, and mine just had scaffolding with ominous men hiding in the back. It's so weird when I look at it, because at the time I wasn't conscious of this. The end of year, I'd made a 2-minute film called Ode to Love, which really was intercutting those kind of, do you remember those snuff movies at the time, Joan the Killer and all of those? I was intercutting that with pictures of women, and without knowing it, I'd engaged in this whole year of art therapy, trying to process that.
To segue away, just while we're on this subject, the whole Me Too thing that's happening now, where do you sit on that?
It's a difficult one, because as much as I recognise what's happened historically, I think we're in danger of creating a world where nobody knows how to even be. I read somewhere that in universities in America, you sign contracts where you're not allowed, if you have sex when you're drunk now, it could be held up in a court of law that there was no consent. Well, no one I know would ever have sex in the beginning unless they were drunk. I think we're going into
and you have all the personal pronouns
world.
thing, 31 different types.
No, I don't. I don't agree with that. I can't.
Yeah, I know, same.
There's a realisation, and that people want to do something about it, and I'm glad, but it's this thing where okay, Chuck Close or all these artists and they want to remove their work. Well, you're going to have to remove all of Picasso's work. You're going to have to remove Egon Schiller's work. You're going to have to remove most people's work if you start judging them by these things. When you focus on these famous people and they become these big stories and everybody talks about it, what we need to look at is more institutionalised things where this happens. Let's focus on the church. Let's focus on our care homes. There is terrible things happening on a huge scale, but I think the media likes to pick up on one thing and hang them out to dry, and it becomes that.
Well, one of the big themes in your work is, for want of a better word, sauciness, and females using sexuality in a way that would be very almost working man's club sort of stereotype, but with a very biting angle to it.
My work definitely pushes boundaries. Yeah. And my work has to come from someone of my age. The funny thing is I think a lot of things are generational. You have a generation now who go, we're not having this. We want it our way. They're very much leading an agenda. This agenda where no one can be offended. It's a dangerous place to go down because who's to say who's offended? My work's offensive to huge amounts of people, but I defend my right to do it.
Yeah.
Lots of people like my work and lots of people don't, and even now, I'm getting accused of a cultural appropriation and getting told that somebody would be offended. They're not offended, but somebody else will be offended. And I think that being offended about artwork is the least of our problems given the state of the country. It's a divisive.
But it's also dangerous.
Yes.
Because we have to, all revolutions start with the sound of one voice usually. Like your point that you made about your generation, if you think about it, when we're a similar generation, if you think about today, artists need to start coming out and taking the piss out of all these pronouns that are gathering. Like, okay, I know it can be, my rights as a human being, I want you to call me they or blip or whatever there's 31 of them apparently in America now. And apparently if you don't use them, then you're in
I think
Canada,
in Canada it's illegal. I think in Canada
I
think you're allowed to still call people the N-word because that's not a criminal offence, but you have to refer to someone by their correct noun.
And we need to have, Jordan Peterson, the sort of Canadian, intellectual who keeps getting thrown the words supremacist at him just because he offends people. Jordan Peterson. He was the guy who got caught. He was on the television recently talking about gender equality with a woman on Channel 4 who was just acting like a complete fuckwit as far as I'm concerned. I don't agree with everything he says, but I agree with the fact that we need people like this who are trying to find truth. And if you're trying to find truth, you're going to tread on a few toes. You're going to say things that people get all offended with. If we have no comedian in the room taking the piss, if we have no court jester, you're a court jester. You putting a woman with tits on a playing card and something provocative on it. Okay, so all of that disappears?
Well,
then we're in
I'm an
Big
artist.
Brother.
I'm not a politician.
Yeah.
I'm here to make commentary, to express things, and the same way you have comedians. I do believe if you're not allowed to express things, can get really nasty. I think, with political correctness the way that it is, you end up with people in the ballot votes going and voting for people like Trump.
Well, and yes,
anyone who knows my politics knows the type of person I am. But I'm going to defend my right to make the artwork that I want to
Absolutely.
work.
There's also the line, though, that says you don't call people nigger. You don't go around beating up Packies in Leicester. You don't treat people with disrespect, no matter what colour, creed or religion they are. You don't throw acid in Muslim people's faces just because they're wearing a hijab. There's certain laws of human decency that we need to keep and know when it's being fun and when it's not fun. I often make the thing, if people call me Mick or Paddy, I'm cool with that. But then somebody might call me Mick and Paddy in a bar fight, and I'm not cool with it. And you know when you're offending. In the same way with the Me Too thing, people know when... A man knows, in my view, when he's overstepping them. If a woman says, I don't want to have sex with you, and a man continues to try and have sex with that woman, you know in your heart when you're overstepping them. You know when you're being aggressive and racist and horrible to another human being. You know it. And it's usually clear. But then someone jumps in and goes, oh, I haven't read your book, but I think it's offensive. There's all of this going on. To segue this into the art I mentioned earlier about the cutting piece.
That was after my degree. Shows you how old I am.
So there's a jump in here after you did your film stuff. I
went to Leeds and I did a degree in sculpture. I was so influenced by feminist art because it was a big explosion of it in the late 80s. I started my degree in 89. So I was on the heels of all of that kind of wave of feminism. A lot of my work was all about the body. It was all about women's position in the world, and it was all much to do with body casting. So I did all this work. I did my degree. I liked making work, but I didn't really like the process of being at art college. And I left, and I said, I'll never do art again. I don't want to do it. I literally worked in Safeways for 6 months, saved up money, and I went to Israel, and I spent 6 months in Israel and Egypt, and then I came back and I worked.
Like kibbutz or something?
Yeah, right. All that kibbutz, moshav, travelling. And then I came back and then I saved up again, and then I went to Costa Rica, and I travelled from Costa Rica to Mexico City and back again, which was just amazing.
Yeah.
But, unfortunately I discovered cocaine big time when I was in Central America.
You do out there. Yes.
Yeah,
it's quite plentiful.
Great when I was there. It was terrible when I came back. It was another case where I kind of had a breakdown. I became someone who worked with adults with learning disabilities. So for nearly 2 years, I was working in care work, which by the end of it, I'd had a complete nervous breakdown. I couldn't cope. I was,
It must be a really hard job to do that because people are dying and they're...
It's not that they're dying, it's just there's a limit to care work. Some people are nice carers, some aren't. You know that, and it's quite a heavy burden. And I was promoted really quickly. I became the registered estate manager of a house, so it was my job to resettle 2 people out of long-term institutions. I was the manager. I'd only had 8 months training. I worked with people who had extreme epilepsy. Well, they probably thought I was a really good worker because I was on speed all the time and I was very efficient. And when I put my mind to things, I'm good at most things I do. So, but basically...
But would you say you have empathy?
Yes, I have a lot of empathy because
behind your very strong exterior,
I have a lot of empathy because I've suffered a lot with my own trauma and recognised that. But when I had been in Belize, I'd met a squaddie who I'd fallen in love with, who came back and bought himself out the army and came to live with me. And it was at a time of ecstasy. We were partying a lot too much, and he walked out of my life. And I had a complete nervous breakdown, just literally everything just went in that moment in time. And that was when I became a real chronic self-harmer.
So what age are you now, 23?
No, I was 24.
24, right.
24, and it was just a brief moment in my life, and I don't even know how I started. I don't know where it came from. My addictions and my way of dealing things will find a vehicle. If it's not feeding myself food, I'll be drunk, or I'd be speed, or it managed to turn itself into self-harming. And so for this year of my life, I was doing self-harming. And also you have to remember, this is 94. This is way before anyone talked about it, way before it was ever acknowledged as a thing. I had no context to it.
Is it mainly women who self-harm than men, or is it...
Women usually take anger out on themselves,
Right.
whereas men will tend to go beat someone up. I think,
Indeed.
I think if it's a generalisation, but
I know,
I think
yeah. I just I'm not conscious of hearing an awful lot of men who...
Women tend to process things as their anger is turned inward. At the time I was doing it, I kind of decided to make a piece of art about it. I had a friend who was a photographer, and I was like, could you come round to take some photos for me? And he was like, yeah, Carrie, I'll come round. And he came round, and I always remember I went in the bathroom and I just cut myself up and I came out, and he was like, oh my God, I can't do this, I've got to leave. And I was like, no, please, this is important to me, I need to document this. And he was like, no, this is too fucked up, I'm leaving. And so I was like trying to hold a camera and take pictures, and he kind of went, oh, for God's sake, move over. And then he kind of went into a world where he was
documenting
well,
something.
yeah, but he'd abstract what was happening, and he was like literally looking for nice shots, and he'd gone into a photographer and he took
all these professional.
And he took all these photos, and then we made these beautiful boxes.
They are beautiful,
and he had them inlaid. He helped me, my friend Nigel, and they had glass, and I'd written and I'd spoken to lots of women who'd self-harmed, and I'd got reasons for them why they did it, and I had it all beautifully etched onto glass and presented it. And I also had this 6 foot by 4 foot aluminium sheet printed with a photo of where I'd cut my wrist, so it was a real close up of these little blue stitches in my wrist. And I don't know if you've ever cut your wrists.
No,
it all bruises, it all goes bruised, and so I had this intense photo, and it was called Stitched Up Good and Proper. And the thing is that for some people it's like, you're nuts, but for me, making art kind of somehow took me out of myself, and it gave it a kind of a different focus. It enabled me to find something out of this trauma that was kind of good, because I was explaining it, I was sharing it. And so I made this whole body of work. It was only ever exhibited 3 times.
But there was an issue with the photo lab, right?
Yeah, I mean, because I was having all this stuff made at Boots, and I decided to make a dinner service where at the time you could have placemats and cup mats, and you could have it all printed up. And so I had them printed all up, and then it sounds really naff now, but I wrote pain in my arm, cast my own arm, and then made it into looking like a Sunday dinner. And my friend, who was the photographer, we set it up at his house, we laid down all the china, we had all this, and it was supposed to be like this fake Christmas.
Yeah.
But when I went into Boots, they said, we can't do your work anymore. And I got a phone call from the local police saying they wanted to know who was in the photos. And I was like, well, it's me. And they were like, okay, well, maybe you need to see a doctor. But okay, we won't investigate any further. And Boots banned me from ever using their photographic department.
The shock of it is, even when you look at them first, you know it's real. I mean, when I saw it first, I was going, that's actually not someone with tomato ketchup on their hand. That's actually a real thing. And it is deeply shocking, but strangely, I mean, I can understand why the photographer did what he did, which sounds terrible. But I mean, I guess also the fact if he gets it done quickly, that you can patch yourself up.
The thing is the one thing I tried to get him, because I had this idea that I wanted to get myself in a wedding dress and hang myself from a tree in Richmond Park, because I wanted to do a whole series of suicidal shots of women in these classic suicidal poses. But he was like, no way, Carrie, it could go wrong, I'm going to get it. That's where it drew a line. But if I had have done it, imagine it now, if you'd have taken those photos. The one thing I know about my work is it's of the moment, it's advanced. There's a lot of artists that deal with blood and deal with things like Frank B and the work that I've made, at any time that I've made it, I always look back and think, well, no, I might have seemed like I was out there, but now there's a whole kind of art theory you could attach to this stuff. My work is authentic.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if it's about self-harm or if I'm doing photography or if I'm making mosaics. The thing about my work is it has an authentic voice to it, because it really is about me trying to express something. Over all the years that I've been working, I've just become very skilled. Now I can hold my head up high and go, yeah, I've got craft skills. I know how to print.
You've done the 10,000 hours.
Yeah, I've done 10,000 hours in printing, in ceramics, in mosaics, in sculpture.
So you have this very, very challenging work, partly therapeutic in your way of dealing with what's going on inside your life. How did you move away from cutting? Does it seem anathema to you now that you were doing that, or what?
Well, God, yeah, it's really weird now when I see people who self-harm, or like when my daughter was growing up, it almost seems like rites of passage. You know, people put it on Instagram, and it's taken on a very different meaning and stuff, and I can't imagine it. I can't imagine why I would ever have done that. I mean, it really was just a period of my life. I was in a show called Disturbance Value, and there was another artist on show who had a fish, rotten fish, stinking out the gallery.
Did you have to replace it every few days?
No, it was just there stinking. I met him, we went out on a date, and I agreed to marry him. Because I was supposed to go into a place called the Castle for 6 months, heavy therapeutic. You know, I was supposed to go into a hospital for 6 months because I was diagnosed with extreme personality disorder. I was supposed to go in, but I met this guy, decided we would get married, and 2 weeks later I was married at Hackney Registrar, and a month later I was pregnant with my eldest daughter, Poppy. And I know it all seems nuts, and when I say it as a story, it is nuts, but in a way it wasn't, because us having my daughter was a saving thing for both me and for James. I may be quite irresponsible when it comes to myself, but when I had a child, I suddenly had to sort things out. After my daughter was born, I started to do mosaics. Once I got introduced to craft, I could see myself that rather than getting tied up with why I was doing things, because I was always very analytical with my art. It used to drive me nuts. Why am I doing? What does it mean? Suddenly I had a process. I could have an idea, but the process would take weeks. It would take months, and I'd get lost in that process. People, when they talk about craft, will always talk about getting into the zone. You know, it's a meditative place.
I even do with these.
It's a place where you just get lost in colour and design, and I've realised how compulsive obsessive I am. You know, I'll spend hours and hours and hours, and lost in that process is when I feel most happy. I realised not only how good mosaics was for me, but I started to teach mosaics. 10 years of my life where I just taught mosaics all the time. I taught it in orphanages, I taught it in schools, I taught it in the local mental hospital. I could see how amazing this process was. And so
one of the amazing things you did was, I think it was around 2000, you went to Romania, and I was growing up in Ireland at this time, and the Romanian baby situation was, I guess what it was, Ceausescu, and it was kids were basically just put in beds, and they grew up in the cot, and their limbs were deformed, and your daughter Poppy was with you on
she went on one of the trips. We went 3 times. It was my friend Karen from university and her brother Mark. It was kind of mad when we think back on it. I mean, we went with World Emergency Relief, which is a right-wing Christian organisation. They took us there, and we went back to the same orphanages over a period of time. We got them to paint, and we got them to mosaic, and
we called it, when we spoke last, transformational. And I remember you saying that the joy of just seeing a child experiencing colours and paint, and
these children had been in classrooms just putting dots in a book.
You
know, they were perceived as less than human, and when we arrived they wanted us to work only with the good kids. They said, you can just work with our good kids, and we said, we work with all of them or none of them.
Absolutely right.
They'd never worked with colour. They'd never seen that you take yellow, you take red, and you make orange. Their faces light up, and the joy of seeing all of that. But when people are allowed to be creative, and when they create things, they're allowed to show their potential. And then the people around them, their perceptions changed. Over the time that we were there, the mayor would come, or the TV would come, and they would film these children, and it went on the local news. It had a kind of a ripple effect. But it was traumatising. On the last day when we would leave, we'd have a party, and we played music, and all the kids came, and they would be dancing. And then when we were leaving, a lot of them were rocking, which is something that people do when they're deprived of human contact. But they'd start hitting their heads, and we were very traumatised by the experience. And you look back and you think, was it a good thing or a bad thing? For some it was a good experience. For some it may have been a traumatic experience. It's hard to know. I mean,
it's a shocking slight on a society that, because we had it in Ireland with Magdalene laundries, there's been stuff where women, just the sheer shame of a woman getting pregnant in a family, to the extent where we will cast her out of our family, put her in a home with nuns where she will have the child, where it gets taken off her, sometimes killed, in one of the most religious Catholic nations in the world. And the hypocrisy, we were not even going to go near the priests diddling with tens of thousands of boys mainly. And you look back on it and you go, how the hell? And this is my grandparents and parents. It's not like the famine, 6 generations ago, or it's not like the Dark Ages when druids roamed the land. And you see this stuff in your life at the time, you go and do something about it as you did, or you scratch your head as I probably did, going, what the hell is a country allowing that for? And we lived through it, and then you look back and you go, that is fucked up,
The thing is these things are allowed because everyday people's lives are really hard. If you look in Romania, how harsh their conditions were, how awful it was.
Yeah.
If you can't feed your kids, you are not going to care about somebody else's kids. And so in a way you have to make them less than humans, because that's the disconnect, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's how you process this. This is how we do terrible things when we bomb countries. We dehumanize people.
The people who ran the concentration camps and put people on trains. But it does segue back to the earlier conversation about the person who's prepared to pipe up and say, at the risk of causing offence and at the risk of causing outrage and at the risk of not doing what society is doing.
When you do these kind of humane acts, there is part of it which is about you're doing it also for yourself. We aren't very capable of taking care of ourselves, and so in a way you switch that and you take care of other people and you become empathetic and you try to help. And the older I've got, the more I've realised that actually I need to look after myself as well, because in other ways you burn yourself out, which is what you do if you do a lot of community work, or you do a lot of work in orphanages, or all the stuff that I've done. I mean, my therapist always uses the analogy of you have to have the oxygen mask on yourself first.
Yes.
A lot of it is about age. When you're young, you have a naivety or this desire to heal the world, or do things, and all of the things that I've done, which people always go, oh my God, you're so lovely, you did this, you did that. I think, no, I was a real depressive person. Having my life put into some context, realising how fucking lucky I am. Yeah. It enabled me to reconsider my life. I could go to these places, I could do something, but I also benefited hugely from everything I've done. And when people say, oh, you help, what you give, you get back 3 times, it's true.
We moved from Romania to... Can we talk about the capital punishment issue now?
Yes, yeah. Well, about the same time that I started going to Romania, I picked up a big issue, and at the back of it, it had a little advert for human rights. It said, could you befriend someone on death row? Could you become a pen pal to someone who maybe not have family or friends? And I thought, yeah, I could. Again, I came to this, like a lot of people, thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to write to a mass murderer. When I was growing up, I was always fascinated with mass murderers. I'd read all Dennis Nilsson, Moore's murderers books. I had a fascination. I wanted to know, but how could you do that? What makes you do that? So they give you a name, you write a letter, and 2 weeks later I got this letter back. It was on my mantelpiece for about 3 days, and just thought, oh my God, what have I done? I've got this letter from someone on death row.
This was Louis E. Ramirez.
Yes. Eventually I thought, right, I'll open this letter, and this guy had said, oh, hi, thank you very much for
Was
writing.
he at random that you got him?
Yes, it was totally. It's pre-computers. Now I think it's weird because you can go online and...
You can date one.
Yes, I love the fact that it was fate. And I got this letter, and I always remember it because he said, I see you do mosaics. I've done some mosaics. What nippers do you use? I'm including a photo of some mosaics you might like. And it was so
Mental.
The thing that hits you in the face is humanity. Whatever preconceived ideas you've got about, death row, mass murderers, all of that, and we all have it because the cinema and the media has made us all think like that. You suddenly get this letter and it's a human being who's just talking about the everyday. For 5 years I had an incredibly intense relationship with Lewis. He was a fantastic writer. He'd won awards for his poems and writing, and he became like my best mate. And I would write to him and I would say, I feel really bad, I'm writing to you about my boyfriend or about my weight, writing to you with my complaints, and yet you're sitting in a cell waiting to die. And he wrote back and he'd say, look, Carrie, when I write to you, you give me my humanity back, because when I write to you, I can counsel you. I can be the person that I was when I was outside of this cell. And so it was a beautiful relationship. After 5 years, you get that letter that you don't want that says he's going to be executed. And I looked into all his case, and trust me, I know everyone says, oh, they're innocent, but he was 70 miles away when this crime happened. He couldn't have done the crime, and then he was done for contract killing. They say he paid. But there is no evidence, nothing. There was a drug addict who was paid $500 to say that he'd heard he'd done it. I mean, there was nothing. And suddenly, I find myself in Texas at death row with this guy, visiting him for the last 2 days of his life. And it was just overwhelming for me because I was brought up to believe in black and white, law and order. These things are pillars of our society.
Justice or mercy.
Yeah, you believe in these things, and I think most people do.
Yeah.
If you don't have any experience of the criminal justice system, you believe in a way that it works.
Yeah.
When it becomes personal and when you have something and it's your friend and you look into it, you realise that it's completely arbitrary. It's a joke. It doesn't exist. And so when they executed Lewis, they didn't just murder my friend. My whole kind of world order collapsed at that time because I felt so helpless. There was nothing I could have done. And so when I came back, I just decided, right, I'm going to mosaic the back of my wall in memory for Lewis. And I think that was the time when you could say craftivism. That was when it became activism. That's when I became politicised. But that's also when I became most prolific as an artist. Rather than it being about my ego, it was about a desire to make something that would be a fitting memorial for my friend.
Yeah.
And so I did. I thrown myself completely into making Lewis's wall. And for a good 10 years of my life, I did nothing but try to campaign against the death penalty.
You had a quote which was, "Those with no capital get punished."
That's what Lewis taught me. Capital punishment means those with no capital get punished. And then I became friends with the guy in the cell next to Lewis because his wife, his twin sister, was also pen pal to Lewis. Ash started to write to me, and then his wife asked me to bear witness to his execution. So suddenly, 2 years later, I'm in Texas again, but this time I have to witness someone be executed.
So you went to visit Lewis, but
Yes.
you didn't go to his execution.
No.
I lived in Texas, which is the poster child for capital punishment, if you want to call it that, and a very bizarre place and racist and gunny and all those sorts of things. When Ash started writing to you, 5 years of knowing him, then Lewis died, then another friend of Lewis's, I guess, you can't turn him away. Were you coping with this? Were you able to understand, I'm now this person, or was it like, I can't do it again?
No, because listen, after Lewis died, I decided to try and set up a big art show about death row. I wrote to all these other people on death row asking them for their art because I knew that they were artists. And then one guy was a schizophrenic and he wrote back to me saying, "Oh, out of the blue came you. Tell me about yourself." And I realised you can't just send a letter into death row and ask for their art. You're engaged in a relationship. So I was actually writing to 5 people on death row.
And you had to write this in handwriting and put it into an envelope and put a stamp on it and send it away.
Now they have a mail system. Yeah. It's all very different since it's all become computerised. But yeah, I mean, I used to eat, sleep and breathe death row. I mean, I'd watched every film, I'd watched every play because I am compulsive obsessive. Yeah. I was, there wasn't anything I didn't know about the facts and figures. I used to go around and give lectures. The next thing, I'm being invited to be at Ash's execution. The strange thing is that I'd been just awarded a commission to mosaic a car, the Tiki love truck that was going to have hula girls handing out messages of love. It was the first ever art car parade in Manchester.
There'll be a photograph of the hula Tiki truck on the blurb for the podcast, which is amazing.
So Walk the Plank, an amazing organisation, gave me a commission. I was going to mosaic this taxi. I found out just after I started to make this taxi that I was being asked to go and be at this execution, and so it's what you do. I'm sitting there and I thought, we're going to make this Tiki love truck in honour of Ash. We'll have to combine the two.
Was there any question of Ash's guilt or innocence? Or
Ash, again, always said he was innocent. The person was supposed to have been a very tall Arab, and he's a very short Mexican guy, and his own lawyer took out a mortgage to try and raise the money to have various tests done and things. I mean, it's another one where Clive Stafford Smith, who's a leading lawyer that deals with death row, I interviewed him and he said that if you're in Texas on death row, you're 94% dead.
Yeah.
Only 6% will ever get off.
So you go over...
That just before that, I was on a boat that was going up and down the River Thames, and it was the last day that Tony Blair was in office. And so this band that we know called Sick Note decided to hire out a boat and try and reenact the Sex Pistols and go up and down.
Outside Parliament.
Yeah, and Alabama Free were there too, the band, and my friend Nick, who's the harmonica player in Alabama Free, was there. He's also an expert in death masks. And he knew, and he was on this boat, and he said, "I hear you're going to Texas." He said, "Is there any chance I could do a death mask?" And I was like, well, you probably could, because I know the family. So I contacted them and said, look, when I come over, how would you feel about us doing a death mask? Death row is full of people are so paranoid. There's no trust. But because I'd been there, because they'd seen I'd done that Wolf and Lewis, they knew I was an artist. His wife said yes, and Ash said yes. And so I flew into Texas, then Nick flew into Texas. It was so mad because when we got there, they didn't realise that a death mask is done after you're dead. Linda was like, so have we got permission? We're like, no. And she's like, where are we going to do it? We could do it in the back of a car. And you're like, you can't do a death mask in a moving car. It was nuts. I mean, it was completely nuts. Legally, Texas is the only state, if you have your body bag, you can transport a body. You can take it from one morgue to another. When we discovered this, we went and bought a body bag. Within 5 minutes of him being executed...
Was he lethal injection?
It's lethal injection. Within 5 minutes, he was in the back of a hire car and he was driven to a cabin in some woods that we'd hired out, and we took a door off and laid it across 2 camp beds, and we carried him in there and we put him on there and we did his death mask. It's so unusual. When someone dies, there's an autopsy. There's some procedure. When they murder them at Huntsville, they give you a certificate that says homicide on it straight away, and they give you a body. When we took him, he was still warm. And when you look at the death mask, you think he has stubble, but it didn't. It was goosebumps. His skin reacted to the coldness of the plaster. It's bizarre. It's ritualistic. Also, you have to remember that Texas is a non-contact prison. So when Ash went in for 12 years, no one had touched that man except prison guards. No one. That's why when you see all those classic photos, it's an arm against an arm on a glass. That's as close as you get. It's kind of unexplainable. Yeah. And so
What was watching it like?
Oh, I mean, that expression when they say your knees go? I've had that twice in my life. Once when I was walking over a bridge in Costa Rica to do a bungee jump, and once when I was walking into the Green Mile.
Is it like the movies? You're looking through glass?
Yes, it is. And I thought we'd be sitting down with this glass, but actually it's a very small confined space, and you're all pushed in and you're next to each other, and behind you is all the press. And so there were 5 witnesses for him, and in another room is the people who are watching it, who's the victim's family. But I was there holding the hand of his wife. All I can really remember is her wiping away the condensation on the glass so she could continue to make eye contact with him.
Was he sedated?
Well, he's strapped down on a gurney.
Oh, do you think he was sedated before he
walks
into the room?
No. And the thing is prior to that, we'd been walked into this room that was like something from Dukes of Hazzard, like some really old 70s office. We were told now is the time, so we get up and we walk. And we walked, and you kind of have to hold yourself. You have to go, right, this is it. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get every bit of strength I can, and I'm going to muster it, and I'm going to do this. So they walk you into this room, and you sit down, and then nothing happened for 27 minutes. They held us in a room. No one spoke. I was like, what's going on? Well, why are we here? And I spoke to we don't know. And apparently we found out afterwards they were looking for a vein. But all that time you're in disbelief. You're thinking maybe he'll get a reprieve, because people get reprieved. People get reprieved after they've been executed. But then after 27 minutes of just sitting in this weird office, we would, nope, right, that's it. And you walk into a room and he's just tied to a gurney. And, people say that it's quick and it's painless. Well, it's not. It took him 7.5 minutes to die. That's like listening to 2 records. You listen to 2 records and think that's how long it takes that person to die.
In great pain?
It's hard to know whether they're in pain, but they are moving and jerking against
spasms,
something. Yeah. I know it's not quick, and I doubt it's painless.
And sometimes they completely botch it.
Yes, absolutely. I think the same when I was assaulted, that you kind of have out-of-body experiences when things are happening that are so traumatic. There is a way that your body or your mind copes, and that is to kind of almost take yourself out of that space. In a lot of ways it was a blur, and the thing is that when most people go see an execution, they go see an execution and that's it. You walk away. But for us, we saw the execution and then it's like, shit, we've got something to do now. As soon as that execution was finished, we were running down the road, we were going to a morgue, we were picking up a body, we were putting it in the car, and we were driving for about half an hour. Now, it may be legal to transport dead bodies. It's not legal to take them out and put them in a cabin and do death masks on them. You've got all this adrenaline kicking in. You're trying to do this thing. The family was there. We were all there. We went in. We made this death mask. It's incredibly hot in the middle of this like weird camping site, and then we have to put him back into a car, and then we have to drive across state for 4 hours to deliver him to another place. And part of the time we were in a 2-car convoy where the car in front was pulled over for speeding. And we're thinking like, do you know what I mean? We got this dead body in the bag. It was a mad experience. It was like the weirdest road trip.
Only in Texas.
But in a sense, it's what saved it. You know, when we look back at that experience, it was like we got one over on the authorities. Yeah. Before they execute someone, you have 1 hour to talk on the phone. Ash was on the phone and he said, oh my God, when Carrie came to see me and I saw her cry, I saw her break down, I saw humanity in her eyes. He said, I can't believe you came all this way for me for a death mask, man. That's usually bestowed on kings. He said, now I know I ain't trash. Now I know I'm somebody. It took on a whole life force of its own. We really believed in what we were doing. We went there, we got the death mask, we came back. Within 1 week, that death mask was on the top of the Tiki love truck, and we went through the streets of Manchester with 45,000 people cheering. That's like a deity. We cast a spell. It's like magic. And you have to believe in all that because that's what carries you through that process. I was always worried because of my mental health and because of the way that I am, and I'm an extremely sensitive person, that somehow it would disturb me. But in some way it didn't, because the art aspect, the same way when I was a self-harmer and I made art out of it, the same way when I went to Romania and we made an artistic response, the same way with death row, making an artistic response, it saves you. I've always known that. I've always known that the people in death row who write and they paint, that creativity is what gives us our sanity and our humanity. My whole life journey has presented it time and time again to me. My mission and Nick's mission was to give Ash a life beyond death, was to try and use him as an example to try and let people know about the injustice of the death penalty. And for like 7 years we used to drive that truck around Glastonbury. The Mutoid Wastes used to have it in all their shows. We've taken it to Blackpool to their illuminated light show. We've been to Edinburgh for New Year's Eve. We just used to drive it around, and people will come up to you and they'll say, oh my God, what's that? And you'll be able to tell them. And when you tell the story like I've told you, it humanizes it. It opens up a dialect rather than people going, oh, you know, kill them. You know, in 2014, that went into the Victoria and Albert Museum. It was one of the star exhibits for disobedient objects, how one can out-design authority. Over 400,000 people went to that show, and it's kind of amazing. You know, you do things you don't really know what you're doing, but that's the beauty of art. It's the beauty of writing a song or making a mosaic or any creative pursuit. It has its own life force, and then you put it out to the world, and amazing things happen from that.
Did you get much outrage for doing it?
No, because it's a bit like my house. I think that when you do things through the conduit of art and craft in particular, it neutralises things. That's the beauty of art and the beauty of craft and the beauty of music, because I think they're levelers. People, you know, the working class don't like them, the rich don't like the poor, or, you know, you have all these tribes. But the thing that we all can agree on is, oh, we all love this music, or we all love that. That's why, you know, I love that quote, beware artists, they mix with all levels of society and are therefore the most dangerous. But that's why they try to control culture, because in a sense it's that one part where we can all be, say, at a rock festival and dancing to a record, and it doesn't really matter what your background is, because it unifies us all in that moment.
I remember years ago I was doing a Myers-Briggs test, which I found kind of weirdly interesting. But one of the questions on it was, which is better, justice or mercy? And you're meant to just give whatever answer your mind gives you, not think about it too much. And it was funny, I had a very epiphany-like response to that, because my initial response, and probably given my background, was justice is always better than mercy. And one of my friends, Danny Higgins, he had put down mercy. And I said, why? And he went, just 2 words. He said, whose justice? And as soon as I heard those 2 words, I went, oh, fuck. Is it Hitler's justice? King Henry VIII's justice? Is it Donald Trump's justice? But mercy is just mercy.
I would have said justice as well, funnily enough.
But isn't mercy the right answer? Like, given even those experiences that you go through.
The death penalty is wrong whether they're guilty or innocent. I've written to people who did commit the crime. Yeah. There is a statistic. When Bush was in charge of Texas, 3 out of every 4 people on death row in Texas were ex-military. Now, I wrote to 5 people in Texas, and 4 of them had served in the military. And also, it's not about what colour you are, it's about who you kill. You kill a white person, you're on death row. That all of these things are played out. You can see how unfair it is. Trust me, there are people who are dangerous who need to be taken out of society.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of people on death row look into their lives and they will be tragic.
Yeah. I'm going to just want to now go to where your life is going. You have 3 kids, Poppy, Rudy, Roxy. You're part of a partnership with Bob Osborne. Anyone who's listening to the podcast can scroll back and find an interview with Carrie's partner. And you've just been appointed the first ever visual artist for Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. So talk to me about, first of all, congratulations, because that is amazing. When I interview and meet people like you, one of the things that annoys me is how institutions are afraid of people like you. And you're starting to get...
Well, I know, for an anarchist ceramicist, I've done quite well,
You
though.
have.
I wouldn't even say that
But
about
you know what I
myself
mean by
anymore.
that? All the way back to your story at the start of the podcast about, don't do that because, but the idea that certain sections of institutional society are able to sit down and go, you know what, we're going to give it to her. Why? Because she's brave, because she is true, she has integrity, and she believes. And that's the criteria and tick boxes that really all artists should be given. So tell me about this new role that you have.
Well, I'm halfway through it. I was really surprised when they did give it to me. I'm still always surprised when I get these kind of prestigious jobs. I mean, for me it was a huge honour, especially because when I went in the interview I told them I don't know anything about Shakespeare. If I'm honest, I studied 2 plays, O-level and A-level, but I can't watch it. It just, it's impenetrable.
I'm with you on that, yeah.
And I think they liked my honesty. They gave me the job, so I have to spend a period of time up in Stratford-upon-Avon, go to all the places. They've given me totally free range to do whatever I like. It's empowering for me to go there and be part of this process, because I'm an individual, like I said, I suffer from insecurities myself. To go there and to be listened to and to have these world authorities talk to me is kind of an amazing position to be in. And it's kind of funny because you talked about Bob. The way we got together was Bob came to my studio and he bought a plate off me because there's Anne Hathaway plates that are Alfred Meekin plates that I always loved because it's the quintessential cottage.
I know them, yeah.
Everyone knows it. So I'd been working with these plates for years, putting things on them because I loved it. And I'd put on Only Fools and Horses. I'd stuck on a transfer that I got that should have gone on a mug in the 80s, but I put it on there that says this time next year it would be Millionaires. I didn't know Millionaires was spelt wrong because I'm a raw academic, but that's the way
Even
it had
better.
been spelt. But Bob loved this plate and he came to my studio and he bought it. Then, we got together after this. It was funny because he said, when I got the Shakespeare job, he said to me, oh yeah, well, you've got Anne Hathaway's plate. And I was like, well, yeah. He said, well, Anne Hathaway's Shakespeare's wife.
I didn't know that.
I was like, really? Well, why would you? Listen.
I thought she was an actress in America.
Well, no, but why would you know Anne Hathaway?
No, I know. I get it.
Unless you have, someone's told you wouldn't.
You like doing pub quizzes or something.
And so, funnily enough, last Monday, I had to present halfway through my findings to the trustees of Shakespeare's Birthplace Trust, and I had to go and present, and I showed them all these plates that I'd done previously and said, I've been working with this plate, but I had no understanding that this was Anne Hathaway. And that's where a lot of my body of my work has come from, is from the very idea that you have Shakespeare. Everyone knows who Shakespeare is. Everyone has an opinion of Shakespeare. His wife is just being reduced to a cottage. She's not referred to as Miss Mrs. Shakespeare. What I've done with my residency is to think, well, it's Year of the Woman. We have enough about history. Why don't we have her story?
Great.
And so a large part of my work is looking at the women. A lot of it's based on Germaine Greer, who's given a feminist interpretation of Anne Hathaway. Looking at that, but looking at all the alternatives. Because what I like to do is I'm a bit like an investigator. I go there, not knowing anything, look at this, look at that, compare it, and think, well, what's interesting to me? Well, what's interesting to me is how I believe history is a lie agreed upon.
Good line.
Well, it is, and it's like history, his story, whose story.
Yeah.
It
usually
fits.
his.
Of course, that's why it's called his story. And it's an agenda.
Yeah.
And the most amazing thing about Shakespeare is that really we know nothing. We don't really even know if Shakespeare wrote the plays. That's not a topic they want me to cover.
No, I bet.
But the fact is that when people write or talk about Shakespeare, they just project their own agenda. Some people want him to be this bisexual who ran off and did this. Some people want him to be a collective of people. Germaine Greer wants it to be about all the women. But that's the point. When you don't have real information, you go and look for the things that back up your argument.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm kind of going in there blank and thinking, well, rather than try and make commentary on it, I'm making commentary on the fact of how history is dictated, how these things are passed down throughout history. Anne Hathaway is this woman of contempt. You know, if you really do read about her, most scholars say that she's ugly. There's no photo of her, so how can you say that? She's the older woman who got this young guy, had his babies, you know, and he ran away because he couldn't bear to be with her. This is a woman who lived during the plague, who had 3 children, who kept the home going. If Shakespeare hated his wife, he still went back there, if you follow the narrative that we were led to believe. He chose to go back there. She was living with his parents. So I'm interested in how history is taught, because when I did the stuff on the Victoria and Albert Museum, I got to do a ceramic intervention on the front, and one of the things that I wrote was history as a weapon. And it is, because it's like, whose history? They always say it's the winner, the person who wins dictates the history. And so I'm trying to visually reimagine Anne Hathaway. Some things are really interesting, like their daughter, Susanna. There's something called the Bawdy Court. People were taken to the courts all the time. It was all tied up in litigation in Tudor time. Shakespeare's daughter was taken to Bawdy Court and charged with giving a man syphilis, not her husband. It was never proven, and it may well have just been a charge because they used to just charge you with things to tie you up in litigation. But when you start thinking about, well, these women all had babies before marriage. They've all been charged with, you know, having VD. When you start having these information, I think you start to look at them differently, rather than these dowdy Protestant women that were just...
But I mean, I could even throw in my own life. I'm not going to cover myself in any glory here, but like the upbringing that I had in the 70s and 80s, things like the idea that women enjoy sex, something as simple as that, was not a thing for me. It was like, it was almost transactional, and it was, you hear it in apologists for rape. You know, the whole, oh, what were you wearing when you got raped? You know, this whole idea that oh, well, if you were wearing a short skirt, well, what do you expect?
Well, listen, when I was attacked, I had the police interview me for 8 hours saying, well, do you always walk around late at night? I know that experience really well. The reality is we still have hundreds of girls, say, up north being abused or, you know, in care homes.
Exactly.
These things are real.
Your art with Bob is made in Chiswick, and you have Mad in England as your brand, and his brand is Rebel Not Taken. Your work is, I'm looking at a poster here, a piece of art on your wall, is risque, gives me a carry-on feel. It's cheeky. Lots of people are going to tut it. It's very cultural. It's from another era. You do a lot of work with porn from the 70s, and please do go and buy some of her work, because she's sat here today talking about all her stories, but she does have a job and a tax bill to cover. So tell me about what the future looks like now for you in your having had all of that amazing journey. Well,
the thing for me is that I grew up with a father that was really into porn and very autistically open about it. And so I'm not sure if me and Bob use the same, we may use the same stuff and we work together, but we come from different positions or from different backgrounds. For me, I'm using all this stuff because I grew up with it. There's part of me that likes it and loves it, and you know, when you look at the kind of these cards that we're using, they're 1950s, you know, they're 1950s sexy playing cards, but they're very innocent, and I like all that, and my reference to porn comes out of being a child and of having seen it. And I remember that when I was exposed to it, the thing that always stuck with me was the cartoons. Again, there's that disconnect. I must have seen it as a child, omitted all the really bad stuff and just looked at the cartoons. And I have a kind of a mixed response to it, because part of me loves it. All the imagery I usually use because there is something that appeals to me on a purely artistic aesthetic level. I think, oh, that's lovely. And then I try to subvert it, and then I try to put things onto it, and I'm interested in the labels that women have. I mean, a lot of my work really is humorous, it's funny, it's a response. It's not meant to be taken too seriously. Like, it's been on social media and I've had loads of criticisms, and it's like, you've obviously do not know irony.
They don't get the irony and the kind of saucy kind of... You're trying to poke certain people with the stick and they're reacting, which is exactly what you want. And other people are finding it funny.
Yeah, I mean, a large percentage of people do, but obviously some people are offended. But I, like I said, would defend my right to offend. A lot of the stuff I do with Bob's I refer to as kind of a Tourette's form of humour.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? Good. I was brought up in a world where you were never allowed to swear. My dad never said the F word ever in his life.
Mine neither.
We weren't allowed to swear. It was the worst thing you could do. My sister...
I'm still well able to not swear.
When I go out with my sister, she says, "Oh, do you have to swear?" You know, it's like, yes, I love fucking swearing. I love swearing. I love saying the word cunt. You're allowed in this podcast. Work away. Cunt, fuck. I love it because I know you're not supposed to. I think when you're an artist, there's something that remains childlike about you. Yeah. And I think that that's where I am. I'm still that naughty child that wants to say things you can't say, because what's so bad about saying cunt?
It's just a word.
What's bad is what's happening in the world. Words are words. Imagery is imagery. I'm trying to push certain buttons or make people think twice about things.
So, before we finish, what would you say to the young you now, if you could go back and whisper in her ear? No, I know it's a hypothetical, but I'm very intrigued by this question.
What would I say to the young... I would say you turned out all right.
Brilliant. That is a great way to leave it. Thank you very much for being on A Pint with Seaniebee, Carrie Reichardt.
The opportunity.
I love your story. Someone needs to make a movie out of this. Maybe I will. Please go on to Carrie's website that you'll find at the end of the podcast and purchase some of her unique and original and fantastic art. Best of luck in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.